school camp. This is one of the things I enjoy most about being a teacher. Each term at Hamilton College, the students are taken to a different camping location that enables them to bring the content of their studies to life. For this particular camp, the other teachers and I organized to take the students to Lake Isen, where, together with spectacular nature views, an ancient building had been uncovered by archaeologists over 70 years ago. I'm a bit of a history nerd, so I took the lead in organizing the location and the activities for this camp. The Year 10 students were all focusing on ancient temples where sacrifices were considered holy rituals. Now, this particular temple is said to be at least 1,000 years old. Built and maintained by a Jewish community, sacrifices included animals and not humans. Well, according to the record anyway. Many artifacts and bones were uncovered at the site that indicated this, and archaeologists and anthropologists have confirmed the same by relating it to other historical rituals. Of course, to ensure the safety of Lake Isen, I organized to venture out on a 3-day camping trip with 2 of my colleagues, Anna and Josh. Both these teachers were in the same faculty as I was, and we'd been friends for at least 10 years. I graduated from high school together with Josh and studied with him throughout university. I started working at Hamilton College as a graduate teacher, and Josh joined me 1 year later. I'd known Anna since primary school, but developed a strong friendship only after we met at a social gathering. She started out as a teacher at Hamilton College and got the gig the same year I did. So, bit of a coincidence, eh? On Monday morning, I picked up Anna and Josh and we began the 4-hour road trip. I'd packed far too much stuff for the 3-day trip, but most of my packing consisted of photography and recording equipment. I wanted to do a little digging, clearly. I always felt that I should have been an archaeologist because of the curiosity that drove me to find new things. Even as a kid, I always found myself lost in the forest during family barbecues, or examining the significance of artifacts at the State Museum. I was always reading. My personal library at home was stacked with history books and biographies of archaeologists and historical academics. Josh and Anna both enjoyed history too, but they were not at this mad level about history as I was. All the same, I was glad that 2 of my friends had accepted to accompany me on this mini trip. We arrived at Lake Isen midday Monday. The lake was completely deserted. It was at least an hour drive to the nearest town. This aspect of camp worried many of the teachers at the school. But after a long battle of convincing, the school decided that with the company of more than 8 teachers during the camp, it would be completely safe. The views were spectacular. The lake, with water a foggy blue, was completely still, and the mist of the morning rested on the surface of the water. The premises were on the hills, opposite to where we were setting up camp, and were nothing short of pure greenery. On our side of the lake, the Eildon Woods, things were a little darker than on the bright side of the hills. A musk of fog stooped across the tops of the trees and caused a chilly climate on the ground. We set up our tents and lighting and decided to start a small fire to get ourselves warmed up. Because of the tall gradient of the hills across the lake, the setting of the sun seemed to come sooner on our side in the woods. This didn't bother me, Considering we would have an endless supply of lighting for our stay, the darkness wouldn't be a problem. Phew. I didn't realize how creepy this side of the lake could get, said Jake, while adding some more branches he'd collected earlier to the blazing fire. It's not so bad, Jake. Come on, toughen up. Become one with nature. No, really. This place is completely safe. There's no wildlife here apart from birds and insects, I responded. So, it's literally just us, the trees. Oh, and the monster lurking in the forest, I joked. We spent the night thinking and planning activities that the students could do around the lake. I think that we explore the forest bright and early in the morning and mark a pathway that we could use with the students. Sort of like a pre-planning for an adventure. What do you guys think? I asked. I'd say the students will probably get lost in there, especially those one or two idiots who think they're heroes. But if you're saying we should mark a path for them, then I guess it should be fine, said Josh, and Anna nodded in agreement. There was nothing but silence that night. We all slept in our own tents and were circled around the still burning fire. Anna was sound asleep, but Josh was up. I could tell by the light protruding out of his tent. Of course, he's playing games on his phone. Even the absence of any network connection in these woods wouldn't stop him from using his phone up until the battery finally gave in. I decided to venture out from my tent and creep up on Jake. Opening the zipper of my tent, I was taken aback by the sight before me. Incredible. The views were spectacular at this time of night. The moon's light was glowing over the lake so luminously. Everything was almost clear before me. Then, something caught my eye across the lake. What was that? At first I thought it was a tree, but like I mentioned before, there was nothing but grass on the hillside of the lake. It was a tall figure, and it stood so still in the middle of the hills that I could almost sense it facing me, maybe even looking straight at me. Don't be foolish. There's nothing out there. I almost felt the hair on my neck stand up as I said it, and, out of curiosity, I started walking toward the lake. I stood on the edge of the water and peered across to the other side. But whatever it was that had stood there had now gone. I glanced down to my reflection in the water, and I noticed the terrified expression on my face. Why did I feel so scared? I must be delusional, I thought to myself. I turned around slowly and walked back to the camp. The light in Josh's tent was gone now. He must have fallen asleep. About time. I crawled back into my tent. I glanced over at my watch and noticed the time. Wow, had it really been 2 hours since I walked out of my tent? It was just 10 minutes. I could have sworn it. I felt the strangeness overwhelm me, and I fell asleep thinking about the silhouette I'd seen across the lake. 5:45 a.m. Okay guys, up we get. We've got a lot of exploring to do today, I said as I started banging my torch against the pan I found on the floor. Silence. Were these guys seriously sleeping through this noise? I walked over to Josh's tent and unzipped the entry. No one. Where the hell was Josh? Before I started to freak myself out, I thought of a logical explanation as I walked over to Anna's tent. She wasn't in her tent either. There must be an explanation. Maybe they went for a swim or a hike and didn't want to disturb my sleep, I thought to myself. But then, the chilling memory of what I'd seen last night crept back into my mind, and I found myself panicking at the thought of it. Was there actually something here in Lake Isen? Or was I imagining it? I picked up the torch and packed a few things in my backpack. I was going to go looking for them. The sun still hadn't risen during that foggy morning, so the light of my torch would have to lead me through the forest. At that point, I was trying to cancel out any suspicion of something bad happening to the two of my friends, and rather convince myself that they went exploring without me, or were just lost. I started walking in between the tall trees that surrounded me in the forest, and as I fished for the marking chalk in my pockets to mark my pathway along the trees, I noticed something peculiar. The trees had already been marked. At first I thought this was a regular marking caused by nature on one of them, but as I continued further, the marking appeared on other trees that were leading in a particular direction. Curiosity and suspicion welled up in me at that point. I examined the marking on the tree and, strange enough, it was a deep gash in the bark, so much so that the wick was protruding. Every other marking on the surrounding trees were exactly the same. What fueled my curiosity further was the fact that the markings were at least a head and a half taller than me. And then it dawned on me. I knew it, I said aloud to myself. I felt really stupid at this point. Josh and Anna must have started before me, leaving the markings for me so I could catch up. They can't be too far. I just don't understand why they wouldn't wake me up. What fueled my curiosity even more now was the positioning of the markings. How did the guys reach so high? Anyway, I guess I'll find out when I catch up with them, I told myself. I started to follow the direction of the markings and found myself venturing deeper into the forest than I'd ever done so before. The sun was finally rising, and I decided to snack on some of the food I'd packed with me. It's always good to plan ahead. I'd been hiking for an hour now, and still no sight of them. It made sense to me. They were probably at least 2 hours ahead of me. But what I didn't understand was why they decided to venture so far into the forest. Initially, we'd only planned a 45-minute hike for the students, but I guess they must have discovered something interesting. The forest was uncomfortably quiet. Not a single rattle from the branches of the trees, or the chirping of a bird. It was extremely still. At that point, I began to psych myself out. Silence. What the? I snapped my head around and shot right up. A low grunt. I looked around and saw nothing. I heard something or someone make a noise. Surely I did. I gazed all around me carefully, examining every tree that was visible to me during that foggy morning. Josh? Anna? It's got to be one of them. As my thoughts were rolling through my mind, the noise of a sinister chuckle came from behind me, as if to mock my thoughts and logic. "Josh, cut it out. It's not funny." Silence. I grabbed my belongings and quickened my pace. I couldn't help but feel like I was being watched. From behind every tree to the bushes on my path. I didn't hear anything after that. Maybe I was just freaking myself out. Either way, I took precautions and held my heavy torch firmly in my hand as a defense mechanism. I finally came to a halt. Right in front of me was a cave with an entry so dark you couldn't see into it at all. I looked for any other markings, but, coincidentally, the final marking was carved into the tree, standing right beside the cave. This has to be a joke, I thought to myself. Why would Josh and Anna decide to go into the cave? I started to run back the way I came, convincing myself that waiting for them back at the campsite would be a better option. As I turned around, I spotted something wedged into the branches beside the cave. A piece of rope? What could that be doing here so deep into the forest? This little piece of evidence proved my fear and worry to be that of a logical nature. They must have gone in there. What if something happened to them down there? They could have fallen into a glitch or made their way through a passage that they couldn't find their way out of. Each of these possibilities seemed logical to me. And, right at that point, I started to really worry about my two friends. How do we even call an ambulance out here? If the final mark ended here, it must mean that they ventured into the cave. The fact that they've been gone for so long must have meant that something happened. Oh, I needed to go inside. I took a few unnecessary things out of my backpack and noticed something out of the ordinary. Slightly to the left of the cave was a large, flat stone. I couldn't work out how it could be so round and flat as compared to the cave, considering the rest of the forest consisted only of bushes and trees. Shaking the curiosity of the abnormally large round stone out of my mind, I switched on my torch and stepped into the cave. The darkness lasted for at least 10 meters. Literally nothing but the smooth, encompassing cave walls, save for the light of my torch brightening up the meter in front of me. I was careful to hardly make a noise, while I tried to listen out for anything that sounded like Josh or Anna. I finally came to an opening. This time there were 3 entrances to what seemed like more passages. I had no idea how deep this cave travelled, and feared I'd end up lost. Click, click, click. What was that? Click, click, click. The sound was coming from the 3rd entrance, extremely faint, but audible. I decided to follow the sound in the hope that it would lead me to my friends. It must do, I thought to myself. This passage was a little different to the first. There were carvings on the walls, or what I thought were carvings anyway. Most of them looked like lines or scrapes to me. Click, click, click. This time the noise was coming from behind me. I whipped round and, in a course of panic, I shined my light into every black spot I could possibly see. I scanned the passage slowly, focusing into the abyss that surrounded the light. I shone the light directly above me to the ceiling of the cave, and I froze dead in my tracks. I stopped breathing for what seemed like an eternity. I could feel my heart thumping as though it was attempting to set itself free from my ribcage. With me, about 100 meters from the entrance of the cave, and with nowhere to run, I saw a black silhouette lay perched upon the ceiling. I could make out its long, sharp claws and tall, muscular legs. It crouched closer to my face, holding onto the ceiling of the cave with its long claws and arms. Its big, yellow eyes peered into mine as if to read my thoughts. My mind and body completely froze in what seemed like a state of hypnosis. It sniggered at me, revealing its wide jaw with a full set of sharp teeth. I couldn't move. It continued to smile at me, letting out a low, sinister rumble of laughter. Without realizing it, my torch slipped out of my hand, and the cave went dark. Released from its gaze, I snapped back to life and crouched to the floor, picking up my torch. I started to run back to the entrance of the cave, attempting to switch my torch on at the same time. I don't think I've ever run like that in my life. I snapped my head back to where I'd seen it, shone the light, and noticed it standing tall, watching me run with a grin on its face. Why wasn't it chasing me? Why was it smiling? It lowered its head, and its smile deepened. I looked straight ahead and ran towards the light that was protruding from the end of the passage. I stepped into the light. Without wondering about the source, I turned back and faced the passage I'd come from. I gazed back into it, trying to understand what I'd seen, what it was. Why didn't it attack me when it had the chance? I wondered to myself. I saw nothing. Whatever it was that was stalking me had disappeared into the darkness. But it was there, watching me. This I knew for certain. I looked around me and noticed a passage of stairs leading to the pit of the cave. It was either that or I'd have to go back the way I came. I remembered its eyes and ruled that option out. I was going down these stairs. I started to wonder who'd built this system of stairs, and when. As I made my way further down the stairwell, the light seemed to brighten. I was getting closer to the source. At this point, I was starting to wonder how deep into the ground this went. The lower I ventured, the more uneasy I felt. I could still see the entrance back into the dark passage in which I'd come from. I kept my eyes focused on the dark encirclement, in an attempt to identify the entity that seemed to be stalking me. All I wanted to do was to find my friends and get the hell out of here. Josh! Anna! I knew that wouldn't work, and if anything, I attracted more attention to myself than I had before. Shit, I gasped as I reached the bottom of the cave. I was astounded by what I'd seen. Perched up on a higher platform than the ground were stone structures, circling what seemed like an altar. In the center of the altar were 4 stone structures, which looked as though they were built for the purpose of laying something flat on. I was confused at this point and didn't understand what I was looking at. I turned my head to the right side of the room. Hanging from the walls to the right side of the altar were 4 corpses. The flesh had been completely dried off of them, and all that was left were their perfectly composed bone structures. These corpses were 300 years old, at least. It finally came to me. How had I not realized this earlier? The temple. I'd found it. Or was I led to it? Then it dawned on me. I'd been lured into this cave like a fish is lured to the bait. I started to piece everything together, all the while losing focus on my surroundings. The silhouette I'd seen across the lake the first night, the eyes in the forest, the markings on the trees, and the chuckles that stalked me all the way to the cave. It all made sense now. I'd been marked that night, and whatever this thing was knew my weakness, and I followed its plan so precisely that it sniggered at my stupidity when it gazed into my face in the darkness. At that point, I knew for certain that Josh and Anna were not here. I had to get back to camp to warn them. Bang! I snapped out of my thoughts and turned to the source of the sound. There it was, crouching low on the ground as though it was readying itself to finally consume its prey. It stared into my eyes and opened its jaws to send me a message. It lifted its finger and pointed at me with its long claw. I was frozen. Should I just let this thing consume me? It must be hungry, I thought. 300 years, and I'm the first idiot who stumbled into its well-thought-out trap. It must have tried this more than once. I stumbled back, and, as I did, it laughed at me. As I hit the ground, I picked up something that felt solid and heavy. At that point, my hunter had leapt forward in an attempt to catch me. With my full force, I grabbed what I now found to be a long metal rod and swung it so fast and so hard until I felt the connection to this thing's head. And, just like that, it wailed and stumbled back into the darkness from which it came. With full speed, I ran up the stairs I'd come down from. Without my torch to guide me, I leapt into the darkness of the passage that would lead me directly to the mouth of the cave. That's when I heard it. My hunter had regained its strength and was stalking me. I could hear its grunts at least 10 meters away. It wasn't going to let me go without a chase. Judging by the noise it was making, this thing wasn't too far behind me. I reached the entrance of the cave, swirled round to look into the darkness, and I could make out the entity's fierce yellow eyes glowing in the dark. The look of hatred and thirst were portrayed in its piercing glare. I looked around me in search of a weapon I could use as protection. The round stone. I used all of my strength at that moment to wield this stone from the floor. With what felt like my last bit of strength, I laid the big rock flat against the entrance, blocking the light from glaring into the darkness of the cave. Click. That was odd. the stone seemed to click right into place. I could hear my hunter wailing angrily from inside the cave, attempting to smash down the blockage. I was now certain that, unless moved from the outside, the entrance to the cave was barred from the inside. I picked up a smaller stone off the floor and began to carve into the stone barrier. Do not open. I wrote it in big, clear letters. I had to leave a warning for the next person that may fatally stumble upon this cave. As I picked up everything I'd initially taken out of my bag, I listened to the abnormal silence from the cave. Whatever this thing was had stopped wailing, and for some reason, I felt its presence pushed up against the flat stone. It seemed to be listening to me, to what I was doing. And then it chuckled, that same sinister chuckle I'd heard in the forest. I made a break for it. I ran straight through the forest for what seemed like hours. At least it was light outside, I thought to myself. If that thing found a way out of there, it would be the end for me. No one would hear my cries in these woods. I somehow lost my bearings and found myself surrounded by unmarked trees. Shit, I said out loud. I stumbled further into the forest without paying any attention to the markings on the trees, and now I'd lost them. I needed to get back to the camp as soon as I could. I was certain that Josh and Anna were there waiting for me, and it was just me who'd fallen prey to the stalker of Isleton Forest. It took me a few hours to get back to the campsite. Everything was just how I'd left it, save for one thing. There was a note attached to the zipper of my tent. I recognized the handwriting straight away, and my stomach churned in pain and discomfort with a feeling of fear. I opened the note, and this is what it said. We have no idea where the fuck you are or when you disappeared. But Anna noticed some carvings on the trees, and we thought you started off on your adventure without us, when we were out gathering some more branches for the fire this morning. We waited around for hours for you to come back, but after a while we felt uneasy. So, we've taken most of the stuff with us in case something goes wrong, and we're coming to find you. If you get this letter before we're back, stay put and wait for us. Remember, there's no reception here, so we don't need to be smart about this. Stay put. If we don't find you in the forest in the next 3 hours, we're going to make our way back. Josh. Signed, 1:01 p.m. I looked at my watch immediately. 8:40 p.m. It was dark now, and this time I knew where Josh and Anna were. And I knew that this was all a part of the hunter's ingenious plan. He planned to fail the first time. I finally understood what the phrase, killing 2 birds with 1 stone, meant. I know he can see me, that he's lurking somewhere in the trees, waiting for me to follow the path that he created to save the friends I granted him. Once again, I approached the darkness of the forest, knowing what I had to do. Thanks for taking the time to drop by and watch this video. You know what would make me a happy doctor? Hitting that like button, leaving a comment, and subscribing to my channel. Go on, I've got plenty more stories to tell you.